right. The next session will be on immunization, supply chain, and logistics, key challenges and future directions. So, Piyanit, if you would introduce the session.
Okay. This session is on the immunization, supply chain, and logistics. And this session is initiated by the IPAC. IPAC has been quite concerned with the logistic and the supply chain for quite a long time, and they actually have a working group setting up to look at this problem specifically, and the name of the working group is on the slide. Let me remind you that during the last about 10 years, actually SAGE has recommended a lot of new vaccine introduction into the immunization program. For the first 5 years, 2000 to 2005, it resulted in about 62 new vaccine introduction in the area, in the country. The next 5 years, 2006 to 2010, when we have meningitis, when we have rota, pneumo, and second dose measles, we result in 140 times of new vaccine introduction. And the current 5 years, we are expected that we're going to have something like 368 introduction in the country. So this is a huge success of the SAGE. But the more number of vaccine introduced in the country, it means that it's put more strain on the immunization, supply chain, and logistics. And what I heard from the IPAC group is now to the point that sometimes it's caused the loss of the vaccine. And I could imagine that it might even cause the lower quality of the vaccine. In this session, for today, November 2013, the session is only aimed for information and for discussion. In April 2014, IPAC will come back again, and at that time, they will looking for guidance and the decision. However, if you have something that you can think of and think that SAGE can help with this issue, that you can think of in this time, I think the group will be appreciate that. Today, the session objective is just to sensitize SAGE to the growing concern faced by the countries, to provide evidence of the challenge, and to prepare SAGE for the April session. We will have 3 presentations. The first 2 will be by George Vandelaer. And he will present you a story photo and also the challenge that are facing the program around the world now, and followed by another presentation by Diana Chang-Blanc on the mechanism that are in place at the moment. I think you can start.
Thanks. Thanks, Piyanit, and good morning, everybody. When we talk about immunization supply chains, we basically are talking about the backbone of what is a national immunization program. And when we talk about immunization supply chains, we should keep in mind what we're actually talking about. We're talking about a process that brings the vaccine from, or that actually starts, if you like, at the factory where the vaccine is produced, brings the vaccine into the country, all through the chain, the cold chain, the supply chain, down to the level where the vaccine is being used. And that goes hand in hand with data, stock data, temperature data, etc., that feed back into the system and gives us a better idea of where are we with the supply in the country and what new supplies are needed. So what we would like to talk about today is the part that is actually the in-country immunization supply chain. So from the moment the vaccine arrives, down to the level of its use and the related data that go with it. The supply chains we're talking about have by and large been developed about 30 years ago in the beginning of when EPI systems were built. And I think many people think of them as a no-brainer. This is something that's in place, it works well, everything going fine. But as you will see in this presentation, systems in some countries are getting stretched. And there are a number of reasons for that, and we'll go through that, why that is the case. But the message, one of the take-home messages is that if we continue to do business as usual, we will probably start considering the supply chain as a bottleneck of immunization rather than as its backbone as we advance forward, particularly as we introduce new vaccines. A few pictures to give you a flavor of what's happening in country. Vaccines arrive in country usually by plane. The syringes usually arrive by boat. But due to volumes, due to the number of new vaccine introductions, it often means that countries have to face 20 or more arrivals of vaccines a year. Basically, it means that the programs have to deal with a vaccine arrival every 2 to 3 weeks or so, which of course is an enormous amount of work because it goes with a lot of paperwork, clearance in customs, etc., etc. This is one way vaccines can arrive. Another way is packaging. Sometimes vaccines come packaged as is on this picture. It may not be very clear from the picture itself, but these are quite large boxes, boxes that are more than 2 meters high, weigh 400 kilos. They're mounted on pallets. Very often country offices or countries don't have forklifts, so this needs to be transported manually. Huge boxes need to get into cold rooms, and when they get into the cold rooms, sometimes cold rooms start looking like this. Large volumes need to get into a system, into a room that is not really built for it. A lot of issues there in terms of the quality of the storage of the vaccine itself, but also issues with, for example, compromising the first in, first out principle. Putting them in the cold room is one thing, keeping the temperature within a good range is another one, and vaccines are, of course, heat sensitive, but they're also cold sensitive. And this is just an example to show that sometimes in cold rooms, the temperature is, the temperature is not really monitored well, resulting, like in this case, in freezing. We're coming back to that in a second. Then the cold chain maintenance may be another thing. Doors may not close well, spare parts may not be available, systems may not be in place to repair cold chain when it's needed, and you get it with you have to do that with situations of locally arranged solutions where people, in the absence of say spare parts, need to still keep the cold chain going, but clearly the whole system is no longer working in an optimal way. So maintenance being an issue. Then the cold chain, the vaccine has been stored at the national cold room. Then it has to go down the chain in country and needs to be transported. Transport can be a weak link in the whole cold chain. This is a picture that kind of illustrates what often happens in countries. Vaccines are transported in cool boxes on trucks. Trucks can break down. Trucks can be parked for hours in the sun and so on. So there are lots of things that can go wrong when vaccine gets transported. And as you move further down in country, the roads may no longer be there or the bridges may no longer be there. And clearly, again, posing quite some challenges to bring the vaccine to the point of use. Once it's at the point of use or maybe at the health facility level, vaccine is usually stored in refrigerators. And these refrigerators very often don't have electricity to run them. So they are either gas or kerosene driven. This may not be the most efficient equipment. The equipment may not be really up to date. And although quite some countries are slowly shifting to solar refrigerators, and also there are quite some technical advances in solar refrigeration, many countries and many health facilities still run on kerosene or gas-run fridges. needless to say, that also goes with problems in supply, potential problems in supply with the kerosene itself or with the gas that needs to drive these fridges. Then further down the chain, when health workers do outreach, they need to bring the vaccine with them to the villages, and they use vaccine carriers for that. As we are having more and more volume of vaccines, also the number of vaccine carriers may need to increase. They need to take the syringes with them. They need to take the boxes with them to collect the used syringes. So it can become quite bulky when health workers go into the villages and do immunization and outreach. I mentioned the issue of temperature sensitivity, and a technological advance here a number of years ago was the VVM, the vaccine vial monitor, which is the little little round sticker that you see on these vials. And that indicates if there has been a cumulative exposure to heat to a given vial. If inside is the square becomes darker than the circle around it, that means too much exposure to heat, and therefore the vaccine can no longer be used. Obviously, that will result in wastage if there are vaccines that are being exposed to too much heat, as you can see in the whole lot here on this table. Unfortunately, we don't have a similar thing to show us whether on an individual basis vials have been exposed to freezing temperatures. Of course, also vaccines come with an expiry date. We see sometimes that they go over their expiry date. Another possible concern is poorly storage of vaccines, that you start getting mold on the labels and so on. All issues related to poor management of the vaccine supply. Vaccines are by and large injected, so that means we need to get rid of the used vials, but we also need to get rid of the used syringes. And again, with increasing numbers of vaccines we're using in the program, that comes with an increased workload in terms of waste management. And then behind all that, of course, is the whole software, if you like, the software of the data that go with the vaccine, tracking which vaccine goes where, stock management, and so on. But the use of the word software is maybe misplaced here. By and large, it is still a paper-based system that's being used, with obviously quite some inefficiencies, delays when things go, when data can reach the higher levels. And in many, many countries, we face a situation that we have a good grip on the supplies that are available at national level, sometimes at provincial level, but very often national EPI managers don't really know how many vaccines are still stored in fridges in health facilities. So clearly here also room for improvement in terms of getting better management systems to understand better where we are with stocks, and therefore how we can further improve forecasts, what is the need in the near future for a given country. So that was a little bit a picture show of what's happening in reality in countries. And I want now to highlight a number of these issues, mainly more backed up by data, and explain you some of the things that we found if you start looking more into detail. A supply chain clearly needs to be working, and to say that a supply chain is working, a number of criteria have been established. And a tool has been developed to basically measure whether a supply chain in a given country meets these criteria. This tool is called the Effective Vaccine Management, the EVM, and it looks at 9 criteria. They're listed here, and they go from vaccine arrival over temperature control, over maintenance, distribution, information systems, and so on. So it looks at these criteria at the various levels in a country and gives a score for each of these criteria at each level that is somewhere between 0 and 100%. And the standard is that in a country, a supply chain should reach 80% for each of these criteria. Over 70 of such EVMs have been done, and I'm going to show you a few data that are related to an analysis that was done on 57 of these countries. All these 57 countries are Gavi-eligible countries. The first part of this slide shows you, first of all, on the bottom you have the 9 criteria, that an EVM looks at. And what this part of the slide shows you is the median EVM score by criterion across these 57 countries. So what we can see is that for no criterion, the median reaches 80%, 80% being the standard, which is obviously not good news. I, however, want to point out that for all of these criteria, the range is quite large, and so there are, in certain countries, of course, certain parts that do reach the 80% target. But if we look at the median, overall, across these 57 countries, these are the figures that you see. None of them reach 80%. Now, the second part of the slide shows you the percentage of countries that actually meet the 80% standard for each of the criteria. And what we see again is that it's low. For example, to take the first one, only 23% of the countries meet the criteria of 80% for vaccine arrival. And in addition, no country meets all minimum standards for all criteria at all levels of the supply chain. So we do, among these 57 countries, we do not have a single country that meets all the criteria across. 7 countries, or these 57, the better ones, did achieve an 80% score in 3/4 of these criteria. But none of them reached 80% score all across. Piyanit showed you this slide. Again, it shows you one of the reasons why we are having these issues with the cold chain. A vast increase in number of vaccines that are being introduced, which in itself, of course, is a great thing, but the supply chain seems not to have always followed. 62 introductions in the first 5 years in 2000, but since 2000, more than doubled in the next 5 years, and again more than doubled in the current 5 years. Actually, between 2011 and 2013, we had already as many new introductions as we had in the 5 years in the period before that. So, lots of new vaccines being introduced, and what I'm trying to show here is what that actually means when you look at the capacity needed in the cold chain. When we started off before 2000, before the introduction of Gavi, the basic 6 EPI vaccines needed 28 cubic centimeters of space in a cold chain. That is to have then a fully immunized child. As the program introduced new vaccines, Penta, pneumococcal, Rota, and more recently HPV and IPV, as is going to come, the cold chain, basically, the volume needed to increase 11-fold. So it's a huge increase in capacity needed to deal with these new vaccines. I need to add here also that meanwhile some work has happened, and Diana will explain this a bit further, on reducing some of these volumes, particularly for pneumo and for Rota. But still, the message is there that as we introduce new vaccines, we also need to think about what the effect is on the cold chain and on the supply chain. That was around volumes. Now, another aspect of the storage of vaccines is related to temperature. The basic 6 vaccines that we had till 2000 for most of the countries were, by and large, very heat sensitive. On the y-axis, we see heat sensitivity, on the x-axis, freeze sensitivity, and we were very concerned that OPV, measles, BCG, and DTP were very heat sensitive. So until 2000, and maybe until even more recently, there was a lot of focus in countries that the health workers would understand that vaccines shouldn't get too hot. So health workers were very conscious of the fact that vaccines should be kept cold, and therefore fridges should work well. As we introduce newer vaccines, clearly there are still a number of vaccines where heat sensitivity is an issue. But a large number also has a freeze sensitivity issue. And so more and more we came to realize that as we move on, more vaccines are getting cold sensitive, and in terms of money, 70% of the value of vaccines procured through UNICEF is actually cold or freeze sensitive. In practice, that is a problem because studies have shown that 35% of the vaccines are actually exposed to extended periods of freezing in the cold chain. So we do have a problem there. Temperature monitoring can actually protect vaccine potency, but is often not prioritized. So I want to put this on the table because in many countries that is still something that people insufficiently realize. When we talk about cold chain, new vaccine introduction, new volumes, the need for quality, how does this translate in investments? When we look at how the investments have moved in terms of vaccines, we see a tenfold increase in the value of vaccines procured if we compare now to the year 2000. However, if we plot on the same graph the investment in cold chain equipment, we have a complete different picture. By some estimates, currently the investment is around 74 million. WHO estimates that actually the investment needed is around 200 million. So whatever the real numbers are, the message is clear. The investment in cold chain has not followed the investments that we have seen in vaccines. And certainly it is not enough to be able to guarantee a good cold chain and a good supply chain. Another aspect of the supply chain is manpower. What we see in countries is what we show here in Benin, which is a typical example for what's happening in countries, is that by and large, the supply chain is managed by people who are medically trained. It are the nurses, it are the health workers, but very often countries have none or very, very few cold chain logistic people, logisticians, supply officers or similar. And so the quote at the bottom basically summarizes the problem with this, is that we are transporting in country millions of dollars of worth of vaccine along a supply chain that is managed by people who actually didn't get any decent training to do so. My last slide tries to summarize all that, and I'm not going to go in all the numbers here, but basically the message is we are vaccinating against more and more diseases. Per child, we're giving more and more doses. It means more volume of vaccines. It means more cost of per child immunized. We have more children because the population grows. And also we start targeting older age groups. All that adds up to more vaccine. It does not necessarily add up to more investment and capacity in the supply chain and the cold chain. I'm handing it over now to Diana. Thank you.
Thank you, Joss. Okay, so all is not lost. I'm going to move into summarizing some of the activities we've tried to undertake to address some of these gaps. And I want to start with this photo. It has nothing to do with immunization, but it's obviously a system under strain. And I think it's a very powerful visual metaphor for what we're talking about. Yeah? It's a system that works perfectly well, but it's pretty dated, probably maybe even 30, 40 years ago. And it's completely overloaded. But it's been used in a very innovative manner, a very resourceful coping strategy to add on Band-Aid solutions to manage the load. But we obviously see that it's fragile, and it may be likely to tumble soon. Maybe you could handle a few more of those vials. And obviously, it's also understaffed. Yes? So it puts more strain. It's not very efficient, and it puts more strain on the individual that's responsible for handling that material. So this, in a blink of an eye, kind of captures what we're struggling with in immunization supply chains. We have data from the EVMs that have been conducted so far. As Josh said, we've done about 70 of them that are starting to show what the performance gaps are in the areas of supply chain. We know that countries are developing good coping mechanisms to manage the strain, but these are very short-term, they're very reactive, they're very fragmented. And it helps keep up with the pace, but they're probably not sustainable. So overall, we feel that the system has been taken for granted, and it's at a point where it's quite vulnerable now. So we think without more investment, what are we risking? I think we're risking that the immunization supply chain will always lag behind the ambitions for new vaccine introduction. It'll continue to be a rate-limiting step. That the limited human and financial resources that are invested in this program will continue to challenge us with respect to routine EPI delivery and will limit our ability to achieve the GVAP goals. And lastly, there are promising approaches and technologies that are available to us today that are not being prioritized. So case in point, from the private sector, we have some examples, not necessarily from EPI, but some supply chain innovations that could help inform our processes. We have Thailand, who has outsourced the distribution of its vaccines. So there are lessons that could be learned, and we could be more proactive about accessing those lessons and seeing how they're applicable to our settings. So what are we looking for from SAGE? What we hope how SAGE can help us is to elevate the dialogue and grab global attention on this issue. I think what we need is a paradigm shift. I think for a long time it's been perceived as a technician's problem, a detail to EPI, but it's a systems-wide problem, and I think it needs to be recognized as such. I think we need help reinforcing the urgency of the message that the EPI community needs to invest in the backbone of EPI. We have millions of dollars of commodities transiting through this system. So we cannot, if we intend to achieve the GVAP goals and make sure there's good quality vaccine available at the point of use, we can't continue to shuttle it through a system with a design mindset that's 30 or 40 years old. We need help advising on the vision and the strategy for the future and helping us gain some leverage to mobilize country commitment to act and partner commitment to act. So today is simply the amuse-bouche, as Piyanit said. It's simply for information, but we hope to come back to you next year for the entrée. And there's your amuse-bouche. So for April, what we'd like to do is to come back with you on presenting you some ideas that pull together multiple strands of work on existing learning from Project Optimize. For those of you who are not familiar, that is a PATH WHO partnership that terminated in September of this year. And under the stewardship of Optimize, they developed what's called a 2020 vision for the future of supply chains for vaccines that helps chart, conceptualizes what we're dealing with and helps chart a way forward. We will also have more data analysis from the EVM strategy, and we will be able to share some initiatives that have shown proof of concept that we think are showing some positive results that we can continue to leverage. We'd like to illustrate the new strategic thinking in this area and highlight what the opportunities are for a vitalized commitment. We have a multitude of stakeholders now, that find this area quite important. In addition to the WHO UNICEF hub, which I'll describe in just a moment, there's increased attention to the programmatic and operational implications of policy decisions that are made at global level by a number of entities, interest by a number of entities, including IPAC. There is also, as you heard from Seth, the commitment to their next cycle to focus on supply chain strategy improvements, of which WHO and UNICEF is also a lead thinker behind that. And lastly, even the Gates Foundation has an area or portfolio of work to strengthen supply chain strategy and to implement different innovations in targeted countries and in global strategies. Oh, so let me just say, it looks like disparate pieces of work, but in fact they're quite interrelated and they're quite complementary, and I think there are synergies we can build on from these opportunities. We're not entirely starting from scratch. As I said, there's already been some existing thinking behind this under the stewardship of Optimize, which continues to build a way forward for us on how to move. This is an article that's in your yellow book. And as the first author is my supervisor and the second author is sitting to my left, I have to tell you it's not a bad article. So you have to read it. I encourage you to read it. As well, in the GVAP, as a component and a recommendation in Strategy 4 for immunization supply chain strengthening, there is a strong recommendation to invest in cold chain, supply chain, and cold chain development. So under the stewardship of Optimize, there was a wide consultative process on developing a vision statement, which you see here at the top of the slide, of which the objective is to attain the right products in the right quantities, in the right place, at the right time, in the right condition, at the right cost, to whoever needs it at the point of administration, whether it's a baby, an infant, an adolescent, an adult. The vision covers 5 main pillars or tenets, and there's a number of activities that have been undertaken in those areas. Some have gained more traction than others. Time doesn't permit me to cover the details in all these areas, but please permit me to just highlight a couple. There's the Vaccine Product and Packaging Advisory Group. This is a standing committee and it reports to IPAC. It's a public-private sector collaboration chaired by WHO and UNICEF. Industry is an active partner in this collaboration, and the end objective is to improve the acceptability of products, the end products, in developing countries to make sure it has the characteristics and the features that are palatable for use in our settings. It is trying to address in the pillars the area of vaccine products and packaging, obviously optimizing that, but also lessening the global footprint that EPI leaves. The preferred characteristics that are expressed by VPAG influence the characteristics that are ultimately set as mandatory, critical, or preferred characteristics in the programmatic suitability of pre-qualified vaccines. So obviously that influences the shape of vaccines that come down the line that end up being pre-qualified and used in our EPI programs. So what has been the impact of VPAG to date? I think it's been quite positive. So you'll see as an example, when rotavirus first came out, the first generation product, it was 156 cubic centimeters per dose. It was quite bulky, quite difficult to manage. With the influence from VPAG and the responsiveness of industry and the willingness to respond, we've reached an endpoint where the third generation product is only 12 centimeters per dose, a 12-fold decrease in the packaging size. And just as a point of reference, the measles vaccine now is about 3 cubic centimeters per dose. Okay, so 156 was really quite dramatic for the program to manage. Second product was the pneumococcal vaccine, where the original product was also relatively bulky, not as bulky as rotavirus, but bulky, in a pre-filled single-dose syringe. This, of course, is a benefit. It's quite attractive. Nevertheless, it did not have an auto-disable feature, and it did not have a VVM. So this was actually not the most ideal presentation for the countries that we serve. And now, with the next generation product, we see a 5-fold reduction and a more traditional vial, which eases logistics, delivery, and management. We also have WHO and UNICEF who have recently made a more concerted effort to improve its collaboration and coordination on in-country immunization supply chain management, trying to address the more downstream issues. We've worked towards partnering under something we like to call the hub, whose intent is ultimately to harmonize the global guidance that we provide to countries to provide more unity and prioritize together the evidence that we need to help inform policy, and at the country level to provide more coordinated strategic support on implementation issues for countries in terms of technical assistance and capacity building. Truth be told, this is not as easy as it says because the two agencies have quite different organizational processes and structures, but we're very committed to working in that direction, and it's been going very smoothly. We're all still standing. We don't have black and blue marks. But we're starting to see results from that collaboration forward, and the WHO-UNICEF hub will eventually shape and lead and form the shape of the Gavi end-to-end supply chain strategy. And an essential component for the hub in its work, as Joss outlined, is the effective vaccine management strategy. We consider this a quality management and improvement process that we term the 3 steps to the 6 rights. What I'd like to illustrate here, for instance, is to state that the 3 steps are first the assessment process and the implementation of the EVM assessment tool. Again, it's a very comprehensive tool that's used at primary, subnational, lowest delivery level, and service point level. It has a range of indicators. It's a very intensive process that takes basically a consultant a full month to execute from start to finish, from planning, implementation, analysis. The second step is the planning for action step, and here's where we get a little bit wobbly. Okay, so here is what we hope to see is that from the gaps identified in the EVM, that action plans for corrective change are identified, and that these are linked within the greater planning process within the EPI system, be it the comprehensive multi-year plan or the health sector strengthening plan, and that these are also linked with findings that come up from other assessments in a country, be it EPI reviews or new vaccine introduction reviews, and that ultimately this holistic plan is then costed and financed to be able to be, so investments can be prioritized and that advocacy can be made for those investments. And then the third step, which is the biggest jump, and I think currently it's our biggest challenge, and I think it will remain our biggest challenge, is the implementation for change, putting those changes into practice. And as I stated before, as Joss did, to date, countries are managing, they're coping, but the decisions they're making are quite fragmented on their short-term solutions, and it lacks a bit of strategic vision. So we continue to need to encourage and shape this part of the EVM strategy. And the idea is that after several years of implementation, it would be an iterative process where you'd go back to step 1 to reassess what your progress is and to reevaluate and to rejigger how you move forward. The current recommendation is that countries would do an EVM every 3 years. So why are we investing so much in the EVM? We believe because we think it works. Here is a country of Senegal. It's one of the first countries to have done 2 cycles of the EVM. You will see in its first cycle in 2009, none of its indicators reached 80%. The EPI team worked very hard to make and put in plans and capacity building to make changes to their management system and capital investments, and you'll see 3 years later the improvements that have been made. And you, in fact, see even an area where they've exceeded 80%. So in the area of temper control, which is at 46%, you see it's almost reached the 80% mark, and stock management as well, where it was under 40%, and it's also very close to 80%. So we think this is very encouraging. we will intend next year the planning and execution of about 40 to 45 EVMs, many of them which will be second cycle EVMs. Right now we don't have very many countries that have gone through 2 cycles of EVMs. I don't think we will see as encouraging a picture as we see from Senegal, but nevertheless, I think we will see improvement in a number of countries. And even if we don't see improvement, that says something in and of itself, and that will continue to help guide the country as it marks that milestone and help guide us at the global level in terms of what's needed in the field. And the bar graphs are just to show you the improvement in point scores between 2009 and 2012. So moving on to advocacy, just to let you know things that are in progress to raise the visibility and the urgency of the matter is a WHO-UNICEF joint statement to reinforce the effective vaccine management strategy. Secondly, an IPAC call to action for national programs and the global community. And I think this is particularly important because it makes a strong plea to governments and partners to commit to act and provides recommendations on steps and actions that they can take to consider how to be more strategic in strengthening their supply chains for vaccines. So in closing, I hope I've given you, or we've given you, a good picture of the kind of challenge we're facing in this area of work, and that you understand now why we feel SAGE's contribution is so important to this area of work, to change perception, to change the perception that the supply chains have always worked, so they will continue to work. Because I think from the evidence we're seeing, that's a very faulty assumption. When we come back in April, we would be asking for help into the input and vision, input into the vision and strategy for strengthening in-country immunization supply chains, to request a view to endorse the IPAC call to action on in-country immunization supply chain strengthening, to solicit your feedback on other ideas on how to leverage more country ownership in this area and increase prioritization on immunization supply chain issues, and in particular to help us help others recognize that EPI is the backbone of EPI, and if we continue to neglect it and don't invest in it, we will run into problems very soon. And lastly, just to hook people in, to help us call attention to the matter and get people to listen. So on behalf of all those who are involved in the making of this session, I thank you very much for your attention.